Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about using technology to reimagine work post-COVID-19. Feels good just to use the phrase post-COVID-19, but we're certainly not there yet. To discuss that big topic, I'm joined by a real stellar cast of thought leaders today. With me is Miles Sewer, Data Principal Product Marketing Manager at Dell Boomi, otherwise known as a major IT and IT management expert. Hello to you, Miles.
Hi there, and I'll also try and share our perspective from CIO chat about this topic.
Please, please. Also with us today is Sophie Wade, founder at Flexel Network. Hello to you, Sophie.
Nice to be here. Hello, everybody.
Also joining us is Ian Gertler, wears many hats, including influencer relations at Citrix. Hello to you, Ian.
Nice to be here with all of you.
And Ian, you got your Superman shirt on today. That could give us some encouragement and support. We appreciate it. Sometimes we need Superman around.
Well, I'll try to be as super as possible.
Rounding out our panel is Dion Hinchcliffe, Vice President and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. Hello to you, Dion.
Thanks, James. Great to be here. Looking forward to it.
And you were there in your undisclosed location. Looks like the mansion that you live in. Is this true, Dion? Just checking on that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's almost real. I mean, this is the new digital workplace. It's a virtual backdrop. I'm just trying to figure out what plan behind my shoulder.
Yeah.
It's actually the back. It's the back cave.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of virtual worlds, I guess the question is, I want to ask about how COVID-19 has changed things. I want to thank everyone who has joined us, watching, viewing. We thank you very much for showing up. Also, we welcome your comments. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You know where it is because we've been stuck inside all year. Ask your question anytime. You know, this is the internet. We all interact with each other, so we welcome your thoughts. All right, so the question is, how has COVID-19 acted to speed things up, speed up some of the changes that were already underway even before COVID, and how are those changes changing the way we work? I know one of those is obviously cloud computing. I mean, the adoption of cloud computing has really sped up over the last 12 months or so. Miles, what do you see in terms of how COVID-19 has accelerated changes already in process?
Well, you know, those of us who were, remote workers, about 8% or so of the population, we got the leftovers for a long period of time. And, we were forced to try and interact with others who were there and present. And I think, every conversation I have with CIOs, they're actually trying to figure out now, and they feel like they now have the charter to figure out how do we drive better experience. But, COVID has accelerated that. And I think also, the CIOs who got in trouble weren't ready in any way. They didn't have remote technology, they didn't have laptops for folks, they didn't have Zoom and those kinds of things, and they had to scramble, and in many cases it didn't go well for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Zoom question in particular, I remember pre-COVID, people were still trying to figure out, how do I log onto this Zoom thing? We're not sure. Now it's like everyone logs on and there's no problem. Sophie, what would you say in terms of how COVID-19 has accelerated some changes that were already in process in terms of how we work?
Well, for me, the acceleration has been extraordinary. And the way I talk about it is the future of work, which I'd been sort of predicting, we'd all been sort of thinking about it, it has arrived. And some of the ways that it's been accelerated in an sort of to the extreme is forcing so many people to be working from home or working in much more pressurized environments on the front line. Companies, pivoted in extraordinary periods of time and had to automate and digitize in order to be able to do that, and had to identify a lot of their workflow. I mean, the companies, as Miles was talking about, many of those who weren't prepared didn't know how their work flowed through the organization, and therefore they couldn't pivot because they didn't know what was happening and who was doing what. And if I needed to take something down the office, down the corridor to John, how was that going to happen when we were working in a different way? So And there was also safety. I was interviewing the CEO of a company that makes peanut butter, and they had to do a lot of digitization along the manufacturing chain in order to not have lots of physical handoffs of pieces of paper. So there were so many different things for safety reasons as well as decentralized workforce reasons that had to be put in place because of COVID.
Interesting. Dan, what would you add? How is COVID-19 speeding things up that are already in process, maybe, making the changes bigger?
Well, I think what Sophie said, that what happened was extraordinary, is exactly right. Something like 40 million American workers suddenly changed where they worked, how they worked, what equipment they used, the whole thing. And they needed new habits. We had executives who didn't know how to lead a Fortune 500 company through a Wi-Fi connection. Those skills just weren't in hand. And so we've had to learn how to balance collaboration. We have heard a lot about Zoom fatigue in the early days of the big shift. Right. We didn't know how to work 100% digital all the time, every day, week in, week out. So we've had to learn new skills. We've had to, as Sophie highlighted, figured out new processes. And there are new software platforms and technologies that allow you to work more simultaneously. So we're starting to shift behavior. We're getting more mature at it. And I've seen for the first time, I was talking to a group of CIOs just last week, and I said, hey, I'm really feeling that employee experience for the first time isn't like number 11 on a top 10 list of priorities, but it's actually in the top 5, and they universally agreed with that. This is the very first time. So it's an exciting time. If you're trying to, up-level your digital workplace, now is the time to do it. You've got everyone's attention. We know we have to improve it. And so we'll see lots more shifts this year, I think.
The Zoom fatigue you mentioned, we're not feeling that this morning. That happens at other Zoom meetings, but it doesn't happen in this particular Zoom meeting. I want to clarify that, but that's otherwise I agree. Ian, what would you say in terms of how COVID-19 is speeding up some already existing changes?
Well, I think we've heard a number of things over this past year. What I've seen and heard is an interesting stat that what people generally saw as a multi-year digital transformation plan, so 3 to 5 years, instantly happened within a few weeks to maybe a month or two. And I think probably the most interesting thing, digital transformation, people see that phrase and it's been hyped for most of, the past few years. And when you see that, the initial thing that comes to mind is always, oh, it's all about technology. I think what the pandemic did was show this transformation is both technology and people. It's like a DNA strand, right? And each strand, they have to wrap around together and work together or nothing comes of it. So I think we've seen the evolution of technology and transformation actually happening with people. But you have to be careful because we're finally seeing well-being addressed. We're finally seeing burnout because people don't know when to cut off. You could say, I like working remotely because I don't need to commute. I don't need to worry about the extra time being away from the family. But at the same time, that commute to the office and from the office is often your stop and starting points for the day.
Right.
A lot of people don't have those, points anymore. So you have to be really understanding. And I think the silver lining has been leadership has now started to look at the actual well-being of their team.
Well, certainly,
one thing, James.
Go ahead, Miles. Yeah.
One thing, James, I just wanted to say, I'm reminded of in what Ian was saying is several years ago when Andy Grove was heading Intel, there was a story that came out in Fortune magazine that he had authorized the use of email, but he wasn't going to use it himself.
Okay.
And suddenly he felt totally disconnected from the organization. And so he had to get it on his computer. And I don't even know if he knew how to type or any of those things at that point in time, even though his computers were being used that way.
Doing their email in the front of the plane by writing on all the printouts.
Oh,
that's how
right.
Yeah. So, but what's happened with Zoom now is the executives have gotten it, and it's causing them to rethink HR strategies, who they hire, all of these things because they've had to use it too.
Right. I think it feels to me like the change is not peripheral at all. It has gone to the very core of how we work. It's not just like a new tool. It's really changing at a very fundamental level. And of course, at the core of that is the technology itself. I mean, how is technology making remote work more possible? And what are some of the pros of it? And what are some of the cons of the new remote work via technology? Sophie, what do you see here?
Well, to that point, I would actually say Zoom fatigue is, in some ways, is not even so much Zoom fatigue; it's meeting fatigue.
Mhm.
And there have been amazing stats prior to 2020 about the fact that 71% of people had not ever had thought that most meetings weren't useful.
Mhm.
And the fact that we've gone from lots of useless in-person meetings to lots of very, very tiring Zoom meetings when you are having to focus more and you're having to try and sort of engage and see how people are doing, and it is a more intense experience in some ways. But we really have to try and look at, exactly to your point, how we're working and what meetings are needed and who is actually needed in those meetings, and can you record it and have people watch it later and keep other people in the loop in different ways, and use all these different types of technologies and communication channels and asynchronous chat so that we can actually focus and use our time really well and optimize for that. And I think one of the other things is to really, I think we have learned a lot, and other silver linings, we've learned a lot about how we each work best, or certainly how we don't work best, and what some of the things that we need from a people perspective, but also the tools that are going to support us, and how management is different, and the individual differences of how we each work, and the different communication channels that we like to use, we prefer to use with each other, with different team members. Really leaning into that so that we can actually maximize how productive we are. And I think that's where technology can really provide some amazing solutions to help people do their best work, and understanding that each person is different.
Is there an example in particular you might point to in terms of some how tech really allows people to do their absolute best work, something you might recommend?
Well, for example, I mean, the CMO of Workfront, she has been a remote leader for a very long time, and she has used a combination of Slack and an open calendar. And when she basically sort of shows that she's online on Slack and she's blocked out her calendar, and it isn't blocked out with something specific which isn't necessarily identified, she really means any person in her team can drop in, and she honestly means that, and she encourages that. So she enables people to try and not duplicate, but have some of the same benefits of being able to drop in and out, to be able to communicate effectively using those different channels, and to focus people on, do you really need to chat and have a meeting about it, or can you do it with just like pinging me via chat to communicate something? So I think there are different technologies, just as you see some people love email, some people love text, and different communications channels help people get the work done in ways that are not as intrusive necessarily as having to go all the way to having a meeting.
Right. Diane, what would you add in terms of how technology has made remote work possible, but some of the downsides as well, some of the pros and cons there?
Well, there's no question that it's the internet and the cloud has allowed us to all work from home in a way that we couldn't have even like 5 years ago. The bandwidth's not there, the meeting tools weren't there, so that was great. The problem is that it created a support challenge. I did a survey of CIOs recently and asked them how they think that their workers think they're doing, and most of them think they have significant challenges even now supporting workers in these highly varied environments.
Okay.
And I think most workers have. The good news is most workers now kind of built out a place to work, but we have cybersecurity challenges. We've got issues with middle management. Not having been taught how do I keep my workers connected and engaged with the mothership? That's the thing I'm hearing about now. Is it's a year later, or almost a year later. People are kind of drifting away. They kind of have this sense that they haven't been in the office and they haven't been with their coworkers in so long. And these digital tools are good at engagement, but maybe we're not using the best ones to keep people connected, so they actually have a sense of what's communal belonging, what's going on in the rest of the organization. And while there are solutions for that they're just not they're not used widely. And so we see that the real challenge is just how do we sustain this long term? Now, the good news is maybe by middle of this year, we won't have to anymore. It's starting to look very good. But we know the future is probably going to be a little bit bumpier than the past. So now is the time, I think, to get the skills and the infrastructure in place. And we have a ways to go yet for that.
Ian, what would you say in terms of some of the pros and cons of technology? How has it made things better, and maybe sometimes some downside as well?
Well, I've worked remotely before it was called remote, so I have a lot of history in this.
Can you say what year it was that you started working remotely?
Not completely remote, but
yeah,
I probably sporadically did it. I worked in editorial at CMP Media and TechWeb back in the day, so the late 90s.
Wow.
And still dial up, so getting those big documents to come in, not as easy as today. But I think when I think about all that's going on, I never liked the phrase, which you always hear, it's one of the big things that certain people push hard, work-life balance. Because balance is so subjective. How can your balance be the same as my balance? So I always said, it's more about work-life integration, right? It's about connecting each part of your life and work so that you can have them coexist. And, there's a leveling that happens at certain points of the day, certain, business trips versus family trips. But what I think it is, to bring it back to technology, it's like an API, right? So an API is meant to connect different systems together so they can be integrated, and there can be a cohesive integration of them working together to help you. But you don't see all of that data coming in at the same time, nonstop, with it's as you need it, as you request it. That's where I think the work-life integration now, the remote thing, is challenging for many, because they need that kind of physical structure at times to understand, well, when am I working and when am I not?
Right.
So,
yeah, and I personally have been working remote since. Sophie, we're going to say something. I want to make sure I didn't miss something. Was that you there?
No, I was just going to say, to your point as well,
Yeah.
your previous point as well, Ian, about boundaries. And I think that's one of the hardest things, because it's the plus side and downside of the technology and working remotely, is that the day doesn't have a beginning and an end. And when older folks who are used to having an entrenched way of being, which is, you go to a particular office and you come back from an office, and work as a place, it's a location versus an activity. That change is very difficult. And we can still, if we grew up like that and we started our careers like that, we know what it feels like, and it's easier to put it in place. I do see a lot of challenges, particularly with younger folks who have never had that kind of understanding of where something ends and stops, at beginning begins and stops, and therefore trying to create that boundary, trying to not have this burnout, because they're working on average. I hear, I see the research, 2 more hours every week. This is something that actually needs to be trained to help people stop at the end of the day, or they can work later, but they need to have breaks as well.
Yeah, I think that's been an evolution even pre-COVID, because we had personal devices, and they did allow us to send and receive emails on a Sunday or a Saturday or Tuesday at 9:30. So it's this sort of slippery slope has been going on before COVID, but I think COVID has really accelerated that.
And there were some good apps that you can actually stop, after, 9 a.m., no more personal calls until 5. I mean, you can put those, and those were trying to help solve that problem.
Well,
my personal app is my family. My personal app is my family. I have 2 kids, a dog, and my wife. So if
touching.
I'm going too long, they say, all right, you better stop, or we're going to stop you.
Okay. They make that clear.
Yes.
Well, I think there was a sense in the past that remote workers were sort of like second-class citizens. They weren't in the office having the chat over the water cooler about last night's TV show or whatever. And it seems like even now, 30% of the workers are going to remain remote, although many workers, probably a majority, are going to be hybrid, somewhat remote, somewhat in the office. The question then is, how should management handle this really tectonic shift? Miles, what do you see here?
It's interesting. I just ran a CIO chat on this, and a lot of the CIOs were lamenting about really three things. One was there used to be a transition time between meetings, and we don't seem to have that. We can have Zoom stack right after each other. The second was that they would often get early to a meeting so they could talk to folks around the edge of a meeting.
Right.
And that's kind of gone. And then a lot of them, really subscribe to Tom Peters' idea of management by walking around, and they can't do that. And so, the thing I learned early from the CIOs in the chat was that, people and process always have to come first. And so technology will have to morph to that. But I think we have to figure out those people process elements. How do we stay engaged? How do we get more interaction to happen when we're in a media like this, where sometimes I can't tell when Sophie's done or when Dion's done.
Right. It is hard to say.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, you said, how do we get engaged? I think we have the counterpart of how do we disengage? They have to go hand in hand.
I can hear your family coming through.
Exactly.
I would say those beginning and endings of meetings are incredibly important. And so whether those are deliberately put in as buffers, because they're always kind of like, hey, hey, John, I wanted to talk to you just about this before everybody comes on, and to round out at the end of the meeting. So having buffers and putting those things, it's about these boundaries and creating space and time, as well as having those, mandated non-work calls, video calls to shoot the whatever, just to chat about stuff, to find out how it's going on. Because one of the key elements that is, we're hearing about so much, the second pandemic is going to be the mental health issues that are coming through this. But we, not just the burnout, but the overwhelm, the challenging situations that, I can be great today, this week, but next Monday, I might have a bit of a shaky moment. And so managers need to be checking in a lot and leaning in much more to their team members, seeing how they're doing, checking in and authentically checking in to see how people are doing. And that's where knowing more about the person and their family and how many people there are in the house and who else is competing for the Wi-Fi bandwidth, all these different things and the challenges people are going through. This is where my whole thing about empathy comes through, is because we are needing to ramp up, dial up that empathy, and it's very much technology and talent, and technology is tools, and there are lots of things that technology can do to help us sort of understand and check in on people, but also that talent piece of it, and how HR is going to make sure that the managers are really helping. HR is helping the managers, connect with people and see that they're okay.
Dan, what would you add in terms of how can IT managers and HR folks run this new world where so many of the workers are either remote or hybrid or some variation thereof?
Well, it's been very interesting talking to a lot of these executives. The most senior executives are still often going in to the office through all this because of that challenge that they don't have the skills to actually lead any other way. I think that what we normally see when we see a big cultural shift like this, because this is causing a change in the culture of the organization to be more remote, more decentralized, and I think that's a good thing. We want to be able to bring more choice into people's lives, to have more flexibility, and this technology gives us that ability. So how do we tap into that? And the best way to do that is to find out what works. Every organization is a big living laboratory right now. Everyone's trying different things and seeing what's working. And if you can capture those stories and you can tell people, here's what others in the organization are doing that's working. Here are the success stories. I think you have to proactively look for those. You have to be engaging in storytelling. We all have to be learning from each other because we're all doing different things now. And some of us are going to be making discoveries. And I think that's really important to be able to then rebuild the culture and this shared way of doing something, which is, that's often what the culture enables. So I think all of us have to be in that learning and discovery mode and sharing what we're learning. And I think that will get us through to a much better place.
Yeah.
And
Go
if
ahead, Sophie, please.
Pieces, Dion, I love your mention of culture, because I think it's so critically important. And there are many people who say, culture doesn't really matter. Well, it certainly matters now. It certainly matters in a decentralized organization, and it certainly matters obviously when where so many people are vulnerable and dealing with a lot of challenging situations. But so, culture in the decentralized workforce, I see as being, you need to really make a huge effort and be articulating and living it, and really have people understand. So it helps connect people and enable them to sort of feel grounded and anchored and belong and part of the same community. It's so important. And the second piece of that is also that for me, all of this is so critical, this flexibility, because now that, as far as I'm concerned, the future of work has arrived, the key element to that is it is driven by technology. And the drive of the technology, nobody is going to refute that it's going to stop, it's going to slow down. It's accelerating, it keeps evolving. And that means, obviously COVID creates more extreme sort of uncertainty and unpredictability, but that's not going to change. It's going to come in a little bit. But we're still going to have so much uncertainty and changing and pivots we need to make. And so the technology and the people need to be ready and prepared for that. And enabling people to be ready to pivot and be flexible and use the technology and have an operational infrastructure, but just the attitude to keep going with this uncertainty is a huge change. There are many different aspects, and again, that comes back to culture and being able to be grounded and dealing with all the uncertainty that the technology that you guys deal with make happen.
It is so true that the change has arrived, and it's not going to slow down. Perhaps COVID will go away, but that sense of the accelerating workforce that certainly is not going to go away.
Not at all.
Ian, did you have a comment there?
I was just going to say, recently at the company, Chris Bocci joined us. He's a former Forrester analyst, and he put together, after a bunch of research and study, what's called the Employee Experience Roadmap. And it's so funny because it hasn't really been out too long. It's only been a few days, and I'll share it with everyone in case all of you or those seeing our discussion on it. But Diane bringing up culture and Sophie bringing up the importance of empathy, and then all of us talking about the importance of collaboration, but collaboration that at the same time has a focus on the individual. It's like puzzle pieces. Every piece of the puzzle plays a role and is very important, but it's when they come together that you get the beautiful picture. So I think you've all touched on so many things in that report, and I'm sitting here going, did you guys read that?
There was a famous IT theorist, Jeffrey Moore. He argued a few years ago that the focus should move from systems of record to systems of engagement. And in his terminology, the systems of record was a good old-fashioned IT infrastructure. It had a database, it had a moat around it. Systems of engagement, people were reaching in and out. That moat was lessened. It was social media, it was software as a service. The question is, how would this shift cause us to rethink how workers engage with all of corporate systems? Miles, your view on this?
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember having to learn how apps worked. That was the essence of, you took a new job and suddenly they said, you use this and you have to go spend time doing it.
Right.
And millennials are saying, no. This is where the apps live.
Right.
And I know how to use them because I've used every other app that's out there. And I just think of things like expense reporting. I remember having to staple things together and hand it to my boss, and then it would go from place to place to place. Right. Well, now I just take a picture and put it in there and push a few buttons and it's done. I think we have to create great user experience. It needs to be easy. And I think that's really going to be the challenge for companies because, they're not going to keep their workers if it becomes hard in a remote scenario. So I think this is a wake-up call.
Definitely. So Sophie, what would you add in terms of systems of engagement and systems of record? How is that going to shift things?
Well, at a fundamental level, I think we in the Industrial Revolution, we built the machines, we housed them in factories, and then we put the people in with the machines, and we were designing for the machines. And a lot of things have been designed for the machines since then. And it's not been taking advantage of the genius that we have as human beings, non-incremental thought, inspiration, and so it's what is it that we are really good at, and that's where automation sort of takes away some of the boring stuff so that we can focus on the more difficult stuff, the more strategic stuff that is really critical. Then the other piece of it is, when Miles was talking about, learning an application, it was quite static. You'd learn it and it would stay like that for 2 years, 3 years.
Right, sure. Right,
right?
longer.
You remember, like, Microsoft would come out there like Microsoft 97, But now,
Right.
I mean, I was literally just before this on a Zoom call, and somebody made a comment because we were trying to do some breakout sessions, and they'd updated something in the last week. And, we're now, software has become this constant iteration, and people are having to deal with that. It's kind of somewhat of a living organism. And my, annoying comment was, well, hey, they keep adding new features. It's great for us. They're trying to sort of give us more options.
Right. Did people appreciate that?
Not so much. Anyway, we found out what the issue was. But the point is, both on the receiving end, and often it is much younger folks who are kind of going, yeah, okay, so this doesn't work like it did yesterday. That's totally fine. Let me try and work it out. To some frustration from other people. But that's where we are. The iterations, the customer feedback, they're making those changes because we've been saying, hey, why doesn't it do this? And why doesn't it do that? And we need that to engage people to not be burned out. But that's the evolution. That's the speed we're working at now. And we're having to adjust to it.
Yeah. I have convinced my mom, who has an iPhone, and she's a fantastic texter. She's always texting us all emojis, but I convinced her not to upgrade her operating system anymore. It's just like, please don't do that, because then we're on the phone with her for a while and saying, hey, okay, this is how it works now. Diana, what do you see in terms of systems of record and systems of engagement, how that is shifting things, that shift is changing things?
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time on the intersection of those two worlds, because the systems of record came first. And really, now systems of engagement is something we've been working on the last 20 years or so in a major way. And the problem statement is that there are two separate things. And there's this artificial gap between the two. And that hasn't been good for us, because most work is unstructured communication and collaboration, right? And then you have the work product or the decision that comes out or whatever, and that goes in the systems of record. So a sales process is messy and complicated and has lots of conversations and things that go back and forth. And then one record goes into the CRM system. So most of the interesting stuff is on the engagement side and has all the context, but it's kept in a different system. It's separated. So what we've learned is that this artificial distinction we've created because of how it grew up in IT has moved into our organizations and made things complicated, needlessly fragmented, and siloed. And so now there's this big push, like, how do we unify those together? How do we create a more seamless employee experience? Especially now, we don't need all these different touch points that don't have context, are not connected together, and our work spans all of this disjointed landscape. So that's the frontier right now. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors are trying to solve that problem. We're getting closer and closer.
And it's very challenging, I would imagine, because, with these challenges, with the speed at which software is changing and how it's much more complex, and with all the information, salespeople, in particular, say for software, are needing to really understand that much more about the issues of the customer and develop those relationships. Those engagement, the context that you're talking about, Dion, are so important to capture, so that then as the conversion, whether the salesperson stays involved or not, all of that texture needs to be shared so people can understand how to
connect it all. Yeah.
customer better. It's really critical, very, very difficult.
And difficult, yeah.
Ian, what would you add in terms of systems of engagement and how that is changing things?
Well, I think we're in the world of engagement now, right? Everything we do. I mean, who would have thought that audio would be the new hot thing? I've been in Clubhouse and Twitter
Right.
Spaces.
Right.
I mean,
And you
I
get
don't know if you-
5,000 bonus points for mentioning Clubhouse, by the way. And I didn't mention this, but you get all the bonus. If we didn't mention Clubhouse, it used to be Snowflake, good to mention. Now we're mentioning Clubhouse. But thank you. Okay,
well,
go
I'm
ahead.
doing that because I'm planting seeds for us to have one of these conversations in there with more people.
Well, but the other thing is, do you have time for another social media network? That's my only problem. We're off track here, but I can't make time for another social media network.
But that would
Well,
also
I do-
happen most of the evening. So I'm kind of like, that was the end of my day. To Ian's point, like, this is my boundary. I'm not going to do this now.
So
Well,
Sophie, you're
do
not
do
on
that at
Clubhouse.
night.
I am on Clubhouse, but I listen to some of the conversations, but I don't necessarily want to participate when it's 7 or 8 at night, and I'm trying to
Right.
wind down.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I will say, so one of the interesting things, I think Miles brought up how, the new engagement is all about the device, right? So just put it in perspective. The device we hold in our hand or pocket every day now is more powerful than the mainframes that put
Right.
people on the moon, which is
Yep.
timely given
Oh,
what just happened with Mars,
Sure.
right?
Right.
So think about what just happened with Mars. There's a delay for the communication, right? So they can't instantly change course. It has to have the artificial intelligence working on its own and then relaying the information back for that engagement. Think about the challenges, the importance of, I think it was brought up before, things being simple. Leonardo da Vinci said simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, right? So think about it. This Mars rover, Perseverance, is doing all these amazing things across the universe, and we still can't get our wireless printer to work.
Right.
I mean-
or water in Texas for that matter. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
We can land a system on Mars, but we can't get running water in the state of Texas.
Exactly.
But
So I
let's-
think we have to
let's be-
optimize.
Right, we're going through a huge amount of change. I mean, the fact, not the reason behind it, but this extraordinary disruption that we are going through is bringing the future of work, and it's giving us the opportunity to actually do things differently, rather than stay sort of stuck in our entrenched way of doing things, but actually integrate the technology that we need, not have fudges that are just trying to sort of make do, but really kind of strategically plan for what's ahead. And I think that's huge. But I think we're not quite ready for simplicity, if I may, because we've got to, a lot of people have got to work out where we are, and we're not through it yet. And it's going to be, COVID is going to be integrated into our lives in different ways for a long time. So I completely hear you and I agree with you, but I just don't think we're quite there yet.
Well, I do think so. One important piece, right? For years now, we've heard about user experience. And I think what we've done historically, user experience has been, here are the features and functionalities we're delivering. Make sure people know how to use them. But
Sure.
now it's got to be, why don't we listen to what people need and want and build that, not just what we want. That's how you get people to use your offering and to benefit from it, versus forcing them to use something that they say, this is a more chaotic process than before.
So I
it's-
have a funny story along that
Miles,
vein.
please.
Well, I did this company around 2000 called eBalance, and we were aggregating everybody's financial information into one place so they could get a single financial statement. And my wife loved it and was one of our early adopters. And she complained to me one day. She says, I don't know how to go from A to B. And so I noted that down, and I told people, we need to go study this and see if other people have this problem. And so I came to her a month later and said, you were right. People were really struggling on A to B, and we're going to fix it. And she said, well, why didn't you listen to me?
Okay, then. Well, a husband needs to listen, and vice versa. See, interesting. Listening to the four of you, if I catch this one theme that seems to be emerging, it's almost a little subversive. It's sort of like this new world is going to be about the individual worker, staffer, professional, maybe more than the old world was. The old world was a hierarchical enterprise with people in cubes. Now this new world, we need to make sure that the individual worker is being engaged, is adding his or her most. It's a slightly subversive message. It's like, is this new world is elevating the individual more? Have I missed something there? Sophie, am I making this up, or is this any truth here?
It's both. It's recognizing us as an individual, but teamwork, which we never really wasn't a thing for a long time. I mean, non-routine work and project work has grown extraordinarily, and non-routine work has grown the most over the last 20 years, which, because we have more complex problems. We are having to work at a much faster pace, and things are more nuanced, which means we're having to bring people across those silos. I think it was Dion who you were mentioning, the silos that kind of teamwork, that sort of those interpersonal skills, and that's why I wave my empathy flag again, is incredibly important. So, but it's at the same time recognizing that we are all very different individuals, all 5 of us, right? We're all going to work in different ways. Some of us will be morning people, sometimes in evening people. Some people, want to focus by themselves, and some people, always want to work on teams. But so we have to understand a lot more about ourselves individually, and for managers to be able to understand what those things are, how to motivate us each individually, and then how to put us together well as a team and bring out the strengths. And so it is a lot more, I think, in this world where we have more challenging problems and we're working at a faster pace. It is both the individual and the team. So you're both right. Whatever side of the question you're right.
Diane, I'm going to change my thesis. Maybe it's not there, or I'm going to change. Maybe it's not the individual. Maybe it's really about engagement. We had to fake engagement in the old days when we went to the office. Now we really need engagement. Well, Miles, please.
Well, I just wanted to, Sophie was reminding me of something. I met this guy when I was at Informatica, who was the former CEO of a pre-Slack Teams company, and it failed. And it failed because they kind of didn't figure out the formula. And I don't think that Slack or Teams has perfectly figured it out yet either, but they have gotten us to use it in ways that we never did before. And so I think, Sophie's really right. We're still figuring out how to be a team.
Yeah, it's complicated.
You know what's going to happen?
Ian, please.
I feel like we kind of like the idea of trying to think about something and coming to a conclusion, an end. But if you think about human nature, technology, it's ongoing, it's evolution. It should never stop. It should always keep going. So what we think is right now and today, tomorrow may be completely different. And that's probably a good thing, even though it's challenging.
It is happening, whether or not it's a good thing. Yeah. Diane, if you want to take us out, so to speak, my theory of the individual becomes more prominent in the new world, is that true or false?
Well, I would hope that taking better care of one's workers isn't a subversive topic, but it is. So yeah. In product development, we've learned that products that are more user-centric do better, right? And so this is, this user-centricity has been this big talk in at least consumer product development. IT really hasn't ever been user-centric. They're usually feature checklists. Most IT rollouts do not test usability in any meaningful way, even today. It's just shocking to me. It's the most important thing is to get the system out there, right? And if it's hard to use, we'll fix that later. And so those days are coming to an end because there is now so much competition for talent, and people are really now cognizant. They know what a really good digital work experience should look like because they can build it out of all the tools in the App Store themselves. So we are seeing this real return to let's make these new employee-centric experiences a digital workplace that's much more engaging. We need it to attract and retain the best talent now because they're now workers are looking at these tools and saying, well, you're going to hire really smart people and have them change the world using this antiquated stuff that you're giving me. Those days are coming to an end. I'm really glad to see. But when I proposed to CIOs over the last year that while workers are remote, that we should have a worker first mentality to our digital workplace, I've been getting a lot of pushback to that. Like, wait, that's a little crazy. Oh yeah, you would think that would make sense. No, right. So we still have some unlearning to do, as much as we have learning to do.
And where's the push? What are the, if I might ask,
please,
what's the key? Because they just don't want to deal with the worker. They think that the worker should just get on with it. What's their main cause for saying?
They're afraid of de-emphasizing the physical workplace. I think that they can't really put that down on us. They can't put that second. That still has to be first, because that's where all the executives and the leaders are,
Oh,
and things like that.
Okay.
And that's been the historic center. That's why I said there's still some unlearning we have to do. The future is distributed. There's no question about it. It's how are we going to get there and better enable it? And it's a journey.
And even more important, right? For years, we've been talking about the importance of customer experience, right? But you can't deliver a good customer experience if you don't have a good employee experience. They're connected.
Right. Yes, they are.
Well, I think this is a huge topic that we're going to be talking about quite a bit in the weeks and months and even years ahead. I hope the four of you will come back. We can continue the discussion. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. I'll send you the link. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.